Hey guys, it's Mr. Amari here again with another weekly drawing tutorial. This week we're going to be taking a look at a fairly easier character draw than last time. Last time we were doing Miles Morales, so we had to go with like the comic book style. Today we're going to be looking at a more cartoony character. We're going to be drawing Dipper Pines from Gravity Falls, one of my favorite cartoons from the past 10 years. If you haven't watched Gravity Falls, it's a great show, especially during the summertime, about two kids who go to a relative's house over the summer to kind of visit and all the adventures they get into. There's only 2 seasons of it. It's on Disney Plus, and it's just an excellent show if you haven't seen it yet. All right, so let's go to the drawing and see what we come up with. Okay, so I'm going to put a picture up in the corner here so you guys can see what Dipper Pines looks like if you're not already familiar with them, so you can follow along. I'm using a program called Sketchable. It's a program that's on just about any Windows device. I'm using it because I have a pen input computer. You can do this obviously, just follow along with a piece of paper and a pencil. You don't need anything fancy like this. I find that for doing these videos is just the easiest way for me to be able to do this. Alright, so with cartoon characters like this, what we want to do is we want to take a look at the parts of them that are just kind of basic shapes, right? So with a lot of cartoon characters, the easiest place to start will be kind of the eyes, because the eyes will have this very distinct shape that sets off the rest of the face. So with Dipper, we have, let me make sure I have my pencil selected. Black, all right. So with Dipper, we have very distinct, just like almost perfectly round eye shapes. You know, the type that you see kind of stereotypically in cartoons. Simpsons have a similar look to them as well. Now once I have the 2 eye shapes in place, again, this is just kind of we're sketching it, right? I'm not looking for perfect. I can always clean it up and go back later because I'm using something where I can erase. So if you're doing this at home, a pencil is usually best. Now what we want to do is get that kind of half circle shape for the nose. Get that in there. And we're going to go ahead and just kind of delete out the lines that we don't need, where it overlaps with the nose. As you see, just by doing 3 rounded shapes like this, we already have pretty much what the face is going to look like. Now, from there, we have the shape of the face. Shape of the face is this kind of just rounded half C shape, almost that's kind of backwards, where we come down from the eye and we come across like this. Now once I start putting the other details in, I'm going to adjust. Maybe I made it too big, maybe I made it too small. But for now, I'm getting the basic shape here for his lower jaw. Just kind of that half shape there. So far, so good. Again, to get this kind of looking more like Dipper, what I'm going to do here is I'm also going to make sure I have that little, he has this little eye line down here that is very faint. So I'm going to make sure it's there. And he has that one eyebrow that's up here. So far, so good. It's looking pretty much like Dipper. We're going to put the pupils for his eyes dead center, just like they are in the picture. We're going to sketch them in and color them in with our pencils. So far, so good. Next thing for us is we have this kind of oval shape here for the mouth. Takes up, as you can see, one of the distinct things is it takes up very little of his face. It doesn't take up most of his face like some other cartoon characters. It's just kind of sitting right there to help define his nose to his chin here. And he has way more space between his chin and his mouth than his nose to his mouth. That's one of the ways you can make sure that a character is looking like the character you're trying to draw, is take a look at the relationship from certain parts of the drawing to other parts of the drawing. Make sure like the bottom here of the mouth is, you know, the proper distance from the bottom of the chin, and the top of the mouth the proper distance from the nose. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to like measure it, but you just want to make sure, okay, this is going to be closer to his nose than to the bottom of his chin, just to give it the proper look. Now, to continue on with the mouth, we're going to see that with the mouth, if you're looking at the picture I have up in the corner, you can see that he has the top row of teeth that just kind of come down, swoop across, and don't quite cover the whole top of the mouth. It ends just over here and turns up. And you're almost just kind of doing like a little swoop here. And then on the bottom, it's a smaller, kind of more rounded thing for his tongue. So far, so good. It's looking pretty much like Dipper Pines. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to start going upwards here. We're going to start getting ourselves up to where his hair and his hat is. So now, see, I did one of these things where I maybe didn't leave enough space at the top for his hat. What I'm going to do is I'm going to resize my picture. If you're doing this on paper, obviously you won't be able to do that. You'll just have to kind of draw as much as it gives you. I'm going to go ahead and resize Dipper here. One of the reasons I like using programs on the computer to draw, even if I'm using a mouse, because if there's something like that happens, I can always resize it. Okay, now that I've given myself a little more room here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to try to get the shape of the hat going. Now this might be one of the harder parts because it's not your normal kind of shape, and it's the one where if we mess it up, it's going to change the look of him the most. So it's the one you might have to erase the most as you go through. So really what we're trying to do is make sure we get the brim of the hat here. And again, we look at it in relationship to the rest of his drawing, right? We have, it comes out from the little forehead here, right over here, and it swoops up to give us enough space for the hair. Now, to make it a little easier here, I'll throw the hair in to make sure it's looking right there. Just one little rounded part here, one little rounded part there, and we more or less have the hair. And again, guys, we're not trying to get this perfect. We're just trying to make it look enough like the character, but also kind of give our own sort of artistic flair onto it. So if you don't want it to look exactly like Dipper, you don't have to. If you have your own art style, you can take the basic look of him and add your own artistic flair to it. For me right now, I'm just kind of copying what the normal Dipper looks like, just so I can see if I can draw in the same style. So far, so good though. The swoop of the hat looks pretty good. I might have to adjust that later depending on like where his ear and his hair falls. But we're gonna go ahead and finish the hat by making that straight line where the brim of the hat meets the top of the hat. And then we're gonna go ahead and draw the hat itself. And again, these are very defined shapes. You know, cartoons tend to not be overly complicated. They tend to have, oh, what's going on there? There we go. They tend to have very simple shapes. So like his hat, honestly, is just kind of like a more boxy triangle where it just goes up. And again, I didn't quite leave myself enough space to get the whole top of the hat there. That's fine. We're just gonna challenge the edges of the paper a little bit so that we can get the idea. The hat goes over here, see? That swoop line for the hat where the brim ends goes up. And even though I'm going off the page, we can still tell what the hat's supposed to look like because we're still following the basic shape of the face and of what it looks like in the picture. Now, this is where the back part of the hat will kind of come around and connect. Back part of the hat, and then to top off the hat we have that little rounded piece that every baseball cap kind of has on the top. And again, we can always fix this up later, but more or less looking good so far. I honestly don't like how short the brim is. I don't think the brim is long enough, so I'm just going to extend that out a little bit, because in the picture it looks like the brim is definitely out further. There we go. I'm liking that a little more. Alright, so far so good. We're getting a pretty good looking Dipper Pines here. Now we got the eyebrow here. We got his hair coming out of the top. Let's make sure we put our little, the symbol on the hat, the pine tree, which again really is very simple. It's just a little rectangle on the bottom, and then it's a triangle, and another triangle. There we go, so we have the pine tree. Now this is not going to look as clean or as nice as it does in the cartoon because I'm just doing a rough sketch of this, but so far so good. That is definitely Dipper Pine's hat. We're going to go ahead and start filling in the rest of his outfit here. We have his vest kind of cuts into his face here, kind of cuts off that chin, and we're just going to go down to the bottom of the page with that because if you, again, we're looking at our source material, it's kind of what it looks like. And then it flares back into a little point here. And it has this odd shape where it goes in and then it goes out like that. It's very distinct. It's kind of what gives Dipper a Dipper look. Like it's what helps identify him as looking like him. And so whenever there's something unique like that, you want to make sure you're getting that in some way, even if it's not exact. You want it to look close enough like it so someone can look at it and say, oh yeah, that's definitely that character. All right, we have a little rounded piece here for his arm. Rounded at the top and then straight down. A little line here for his sleeve. That's going to be 2 different colors when we color it in. And we go ahead and just draw it straight down. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other side with the other side of his vest. And again, it's very important. Notice how where I put the turn of his vest. That's because I'm looking at the picture. I'm seeing that the vest is about 2/3 of the way up his chin. I want to make sure it's in the right spot, because otherwise it's just not going to quite look right. There's going to be something off about the drawing if we don't have it in the right spot. And we don't have it in relation to the rest of his body the right way. It's just going to look weird. You know, that's kind of why if you ever see like an off-brand looking piece of material or like a t-shirt or something where it clearly wasn't made by the people who, you know, make the show, for anything, like if you get a lot of like bootleg Captain America shirts or something like that, the characters sometimes don't quite look right because there's some detail that they're not getting right in the picture. Okay, we got the turn for his shirt here, a little crinkle here for his shirt as well. I'm going to add some more of those to make his shirt look more like fabric-y. And then, obviously, we're going to make sure we want to put his other arm in here. He's not the one-armed man, so we're going to have a little turn. We're going to have a line go down. We're going to put a line here for his sleeve, and then the rest of his arm comes down this way. And normally, you'd go ahead and you'd start drawing the hand in there, but since we don't have kind of hands in the picture, I'm not going to go over that and go crazy with that today. I might do a whole nother video on just how to do like cartoon hands and stuff like that. Hands can be kind of difficult for people. Now the last thing we need to do is just get that back half of his head in there, get the rest of his hair and the ear. And again, this is important because this finishes off the shape of his head. And the shape of the head is super important for making the character kind of look like the character. So we're gonna go ahead. Want to make sure I don't make his face too chunky. And then we go ahead and there's this big swoop for the ear. Again, notice how the back of his jaw goes up over the part of his vest, just a little bit there, like a half moon shape. And then we have that big old C shape for the ear. That's a classic cartoon looking ear. A lot of cartoons, a lot of comic strips use that. He has that unique thing where his hair comes down a little bit into his ear though. He's got that little double joint here where it looks like a W, where it kind of clips into his ear a little bit. Make sure you get that, because that's part of what makes Dipper look like Dipper. And so we're going to extend that up so that his hair attaches to his hat. And we'll notice that the hair isn't quite where it should be with the brim of the hat. And again, we want to make sure we have things in relation to other things in the drawing in the right spot. So I'm going to adjust the brim of the hat a little bit, and I'm going to bring out his hair a little bit, just so it's in the right spot. There we go, and then there we go. This looks more like Dipper now. And then we go ahead, and again, his hair has a very distinct shape. If you don't get his hair shape right, you're not going to have his head looking proper. So in the back, we see right where the back of his vest is over here. We see that his hair kind of swoops up about midpoint of his ear. And then we get another little kind of scoop over there where we get this little rounded part. And that goes up until about maybe an inch above his ear. And then we get one that kind of goes out, pointing back a little bit until it kind of dips down into his hat. Now, notice how I have way too much space here between the back of his hat and his hair. That doesn't look like Dipper. That looks really weird, actually. So I need to fix that. I either need to make the back of the hat bigger, or I need to make the hair smaller. So I'm first going to try making the back of the hat bigger. Maybe that will help me out here. So the shape of the hat kind of crunches in there. So we bring the back of the hat over to here. And while that makes it look a little better, it still makes his head look a little too thick. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead. I'm actually going to go back to where it was. And what we're going to do is we're going to make the hair a little smaller. And again, this is just to show you it's not perfect. You're never going to be completely perfect the first time through. And you're going to have to adjust. So I'm going to go ahead again. And instead I'm going to bring it in a little bit. So we have the hair swoops up from the vest. We have a little rounded part about halfway up the ear. That goes to about an inch above the ear. And then notice how I'm moving my way in toward the hat so I don't have the same problem I had last time. See? And this way it kind of comes right from underneath the hat and just kind of attaches here. Adjust as you need to. You don't need to erase your whole thing. Make it get as close as you can, even if you have to change it a little bit. Bring the hat out a little bit. And then voila, we more or less have Dipper Pines from Gravity Falls. Not a bad one, especially for a quick sketch kind of first time doing it. This is something where the more you draw a character, the better you're going to get at it. And the nice thing about characters from things like traditional cartoons or from comic strips or things like that is, unlike things like comic books, they tend to not be as dramatic or angular or, to look as realistic. They tend to be very geometric. They tend to have very distinct shapes like circles and triangles that make up parts of their bodies. So it becomes a little easier for you to be able to draw them. So that's our basic sketch. I hope you had fun following along with it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do all my finishing. I want to explain a little bit what I do during that fast forward section when I'm finishing my drawings. I used to do this on paper even before I started doing it on computer. When you have your sketch, one of the things you can do, now on my computer, I use a program that has different layers where I have my drawing on the right side here. I just add another layer that goes on top of it so I can draw on that layer without it affecting anything below it. See how I can just erase the line without erasing the drawing below it, right? So it's almost like I have a transparent piece of paper on top of my drawing. I can even just get rid of the layer that I have on top and go ahead and not have that what was there. Now, you obviously can't do this with a regular piece of paper. What you can do, once you have your sketch and you like the way it looks, get another piece of paper, put it on top of it, hold it up to a light source like a window, right? I have that window back there where light comes in very nicely. Hold it up against the window and trace the drawing you did. And then after you've traced it, you now have a copy of the drawing you did. If you have to have copy machine access, you can just make a copy of that. But you can trace it, and then you can go ahead and do what I'm about to explain here. Now, what I do, get rid of that. What I do is the very first thing I do when I need to finish a drawing, that is like put the finishing touches on it, is I get a fine point marker, right? And I take that very nice fine point marker. That, what I mean by fine point, I mean like a little tiny tip to it. In the video description, I'm going to put a link to the type of felt tip or fine tip marker I used to use when I was in high school, when I would do a lot of cartooning. What you can do with these is you do the thing that makes a cartoon look like a cartoon. Cartoons tend to have very thick, very defined black lines to make them look very clean. Now, this is a nice sketch, but I want it to look clean. I want to make it look like a cartoon. So what I always do is I take, the approximation of a marker here. I actually use my paintbrush, but I set it to a very thin line. I set it to black, and then on my layer, so I don't mess up my other drawing, on the layer on top of it, I very slowly go ahead and I start outlining it. Now, you want to make sure, especially when you're doing this on paper, you're doing this slowly. You're going through and you're being very careful to make very straight, very clear lines. Now, the nice thing is after you've drawn these outlines on top, you can go ahead and you can erase the pencils underneath. Notice how that makes it look much cleaner. You can do that even if you're not doing it on the computer, on a regular piece of paper. Once you've gone over with the marker and the marker itself has gone ahead and dried, you can just go with a pencil and your eraser and you can go ahead and you can outline it. Then what I do is I also, of course, color it. Coloring is a whole nother thing. I'll go over how to do effective coloring on another episode. The main thing I would suggest, though, is if you're doing this, try to stay away from markers for a lot of it. Markers can be really hard to get right. Colored pencils are great because colored pencils you can do, varying shading and stuff like that and make it really look nice. So I'm always a big proponent of colored pencils. I wind up using an airbrush tool on mine, so it looks almost like I'm using a spray can to do it, which I kind of like the look of. That's just my personal taste. What I also do, though, and I'm going to show you here, is I tend to put a little bit of shading. Now, if you remember my Miles Morales video, the very last touch I put on were actually little white lines on the back side of Miles Morales to give shape to like where his back was and where his kind of like his jaw was. This is me showing where the light's coming from. Now, whenever you look at a drawing, any artist is giving a light source. Imagine it like this. Right now I'm looking at the camera, and you can tell where the light's coming from. Right above me I have a light, and I have a light over here coming in this way, because you can see shadows over here and shadows under here. So obviously with a drawing, they're not in the real world, but you want to make it look like it's in the real world. One way to do that is to figure out where is your light source. I'm going to make it so my light is coming from this way. That's where my light's going to come from, right? So in order to make it look like light's coming this way, I want to make it so that there's nothing shadowing his face, but then some shadows where the light wouldn't be hitting. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to make sure, again, I have a separate layer. And again, this is something where you would do this after you do your outline with the marker. You go ahead and start adding some shading in. And then what I usually do is I use it to define the edges on the back part of the character, right? So I might go through and just start putting little lines here, right? And you can do it where it's just these straight lines. You can kind of color them in a little bit if you want to. It's all up to you. Now, there's a lot of videos out there on how to do effective shading. I might do one separately just on shading, but really it's just a matter of filling in those areas where it makes it look like it's shadowed, and it makes it pop out a little bit, especially after you get color underneath it. It really does help. And I usually put it around anything that I think might be casting a shadow if the light was coming from that direction. So like his arm would probably be casting a little bit of a shadow, you know, on his vest. His ear over here would probably be casting a little bit of a shadow underneath, you know, on top of where his hair is and everything. And because the light's going to be wrapping around his face on like this side, we're going to have like behind his ear, he probably has a little bit of a shadow. We're going to go ahead, and that sometimes helps, you know, a drawing pop out a little bit more to make it look like, you know, it's a little more dynamic and almost like it's a real world object, like a 3D object, you know. And you do it to taste. You see what works, you see what doesn't. If you don't like the way it looks, you take it off, and you can, you know, you can just erase it. That's why we do it in pencil, and just try again. Give a little shape to his face down here. Now you'll notice that in the cartoon, they don't do that a lot. You know, they would save it for dramatic scenes, because again, with cartoons, they tend to have a very flat color look, and they tend to, you know, not have as dramatic or dynamic a look. This is just something I like to do, and so I add it to my drawings, or I tend to add to my drawings so that I think it adds something to them. You don't have to do this. It's just something that I do add. Again, it adds a little dimensionality to the character. All right, well, thank you guys again. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to go ahead and hit the fast forward button so you can watch me finish it off all my outlining, my shading, and of course my coloring. If there's anything you want me to do for the next time we do this, any character you'd like me to do, or any other kind of drawing tutorial you'd like, please let me know in the description below, in the comments below, I should say. And, you know, just let me know if this has been helpful or if you've been enjoying this. Thank you again, guys, and let's get to it.